Today we're going to do something really different. I'm going to show you how I made puff pastry recently, and in the next couple of months I'm going to show you some really delicious pastries you can make using puff pastry, store-bought or homemade. So first I'm starting off with a ton of butter, and I'm using a pretty good quality unsalted butter. I just got it at my local grocery store still, but maybe a step above what I would normally use of an average like buttercream or something. This is just butter, and then once that is really nice and smooth, I'm adding in some cake flour. I think I looked at so many different recipes before I cobbled together this version, and it looks like you absolutely can use all-purpose flour, but some of them recommended using cake flour for this butter or beurrage part, and I decided to go with that method. For this, I wanted to make sure that the butter and cake flour were completely combined, but I didn't want to whip it into oblivion, so as soon as I didn't see any dry bits in there, I just stopped, kind of scraped it together, used a bowl scraper to make sure everything was super combined. Then I'm just plopping that onto some plastic wrap, adding some more plastic wrap on top, and now I'm going to just squish it down and use a rolling pin to get kind of like a square-ish rectangular sort of shape. So for this kind of puff pastry recipe, this was the first time I had made puff pastry since I was in pastry school, and in pastry school I made puff pastry one time, I think, maybe twice. It could have been 2 times. Actually, I think it was twice, because you can make a version of puff pastry where the butter part is on the inside and then the dough part is on the outside and you're folding it together. Or you can do this, which I believe my chef referred to as an inverted puff pastry. I don't know if that's the actual term. I don't know if he just said that. Where the butter is on the outside and then the dough is on the inside. I know, craziness. So that's the butter. I'm getting that into my refrigerator, working on the dough part. First, I've got water, some vinegar, salt in my KitchenAid. Then I'm dumping in some all-purpose flour. And then this time I'm adding in some melted butter. And not super hot, but just like, you know, kind of cool to almost room temperature, just barely liquid butter. And I'm using my hook attachment to combine these things together. I was reading and doing a lot of research into different recipes, and I found a lot of recipes where they added in just like regular room temperature, like slightly softened butter to this stage. I saw recipes that recommended, you know, mixing together the like flour and water first and then adding the butter after it was kind of combined. I saw people who needed this quite a bit, and I saw people who like barely got it cobbled together. So I kind of went with the average and you know what, it turned out fine. So I think it's a good method to use. So I again used my dough hook. I just got everything combined. Then I went in there with my hands and just made sure it was completely together. I was really scared about overworking the dough. This could be completely wrong. Again, it turned out fine. You might be able to mix it more. I don't know. I don't work with bread. I don't work with things like this often. So now I'm going to just kind of use my hands to like generally squish out a square-ish thing. And then again, more plastic wrap on top, and then use a rolling pin. This, because I'm using that like inverted method where the butter part or beurrage is on the outside, and then this dough part, which a lot of recipes and the French will refer to as the Detrempe, this is going to go on the inside. And so actually I probably could have flattened this out even less, because you want this square to be on the inside as we start folding. And so actually the smaller it is, the less you will have to work the butter part later, and then it will be easier to start folding. So yeah, anyway, this size was kind of fine. I think I brought this down to like a centimeter-ish thick. I probably could have gone with like 1.5 centimeters or like 2 centimeters even. But right now my like butter part and then the dough part are kind of more or less the same size. So after those have chilled in the refrigerator for like an hour. So they're cool, right? They've had some time to rest, but they're not like solid, you know? It's not like they've been in the freezer or anything. Now I'm going to start rolling them out for real. So I'm starting off with that butter, and the dough I'm just going to plop in the center of this. So basically I need to get this butter cake flour kind of quote unquote dough large enough that I can completely envelop the dough. So yeah, it's gonna take a while because I just have my little rolling pin here. I'm doing this by hand, but it's not as bad as you think. I was really dreading this because I have like no upper body strength, and so I did not think it was going to go well. It went fine. You know, you do want to have some flour on your surface. You want to make sure, especially with this butter part, as this starts heating up to room temperature, as you're working it longer, it is mostly butter. And so if you don't have some flour on your surface, on your rolling pin, on your hands, it is going to start sticking. So you do want to watch out for that. At this point, yes, I want it to be like even, but I'm not going to go super bonkers crazy about having like exactly a uniform thickness everywhere, or like a perfect rectangle or something like that. Later on, if you have those kinds of tools, it looks like a really long ruler or like a tiny little strip of like wood or plastic that you can place on either side of your rolling pin, so that as you roll, you can only go as far down as that thickness. You can use a tool like that to get really nice even dough, whether you're doing something like this or if it's just for like sugar cookies or something. You can also get some rolling pins with attachments. They're like rubber band looking kind of things that you can place on the side, and it does the same thing. You absolutely can be doing that here, but for right now, for this very first step, again, just kind of roughing it is also okay. So I'm just going in and kind of measuring, making sure that my little square of dough is going to fit nicely. And then I'm just going to fold over the butter. It is going to overlap a little bit at the corners. I'm just going to fold it in, and kind of like you're wrapping a present, just make sure that there isn't any little bit of dough peeking out at the center. Now, while all of this is kind of in a warm enough state that it's pretty pliable, it's pretty easy to work with, I'm going to proceed with the first fold. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour again one more time, really squish all of those edges, kind of crimp it down, and then I'm going to roll this out. And this time, instead of working it in like all directions and kind of not really worrying if it's like ovally or circular or whatever, this time I'm really going to go for a nice long rectangular shape. And this is where I think that more professional bakers are going to have a difference of opinion, and that is okay. I'm like, as I've told you, I think this is the third time in my life I've made puff pastry. I am not an expert, but I just wanted to show you guys that it is possible to do at home. Anyone can do this. I believe in you. But anyway, we're going to get into the first fold, and there are a bunch of different styles of doing this. I just went for doing thirds every single time. I think there is something called a book fold. I think there's a way to fold it in fours. I think there are different techniques, but I just folded it kind of 1/3 towards the center, and then 1/3 over the top of that. As you see, I am using a little pastry brush there just to make sure that I'm not folding in any more flour than I need to be. I want that so it doesn't stick to the surface, but I don't want layers and layers of extra just flour floating in there. Now I'm going to cover this up just loosely with plastic wrap. An important step here, make sure to label this. I'm labeling this first just so I know that is the first fold, and then into the refrigerator. That goes for at least an hour, or I think you can do that first fold and leave it overnight in your refrigerator and it will still be fine, but I think minimum 1 hour to let the dough rest. It will help to like relax it a bit. If you keep working it, the gluten and everything is just going to like tense up, you know, get all anxious in there. So don't want that. Gotta let it rest. Then we can move on to the second fold. And the second fold, I'm going to proceed exactly like I did with the first fold. Again, in my research, it seems like there are a lot of different ways to fold the dough, and I think depending on the like layers you're going for, or you know, the technique you're doing, I don't know. I think there are a lot of reasons to do different things, different steps. Again, I don't have a lot of technical knowledge here beyond the bit of research I did and years ago in my pastry school. So I'm just gonna roll this out again, rectangular, like long rectangle, trying to keep the edges kind of as even as possible and make sure that I'm really rolling down every little bit so I don't have any parts that are a lot thicker than others. And then I'm just going to do that 1/3 kind of folding over, again using that pastry brush to brush away any excess flour. So as you can see here, partially due to my poor rolling skills and partially due to just dough being rolled, the edges are a little bit squiggly right now. And you know what? It's okay. Because we still have one more final fold to do after I get this folded up, wrapped up into my refrigerator again for another hour at least, I'm gonna go through this. The edges are gonna get squiggly again. So don't go in there with a knife hacking off anything to make it look perfect right now. If you do that, you're only going to end up losing more dough later on. So first go in there, just leave everything like normal. You can use that same plastic wrap from before, just cross off the first, put a nice 2 on there, get it into your fridge. Then once it's time for the final fold, I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I'm gonna fold it exactly the same way. And then I am going to trim the edges. So when I go to work with this puff pastry later, it looks more like the puff pastry you buy in the freezer section of your grocery store, that nice little perfect rectangle with the beautiful edges. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I'm just gonna, again, roll into a rectangle, do my best not to have the edges look even squigglier than they look right now. Again, I'm going to do that 1/3 fold. I think you can fold it in like 4 or do like meeting 2/3 of the way down and then folding the whole thing in half. There are other techniques, but I just went for something as streamlined as possible. And also with, filming this and my concentration and, I'm new to this too. So I went for that. Then after that final fold is done, I'm just going to get this into my refrigerator until I need it for my next project. So for me, that was the day before. If you're not going to use it right away, again, just like you find in the freezer section of your grocery store, you can have puff pastry in your freezer. So I think this is a really cool thing to have on hand if you have a day where you have some extra time. There aren't that many ingredients that go into this. And even though you have to do all of this waiting, puff pastry, the actual making of it, doesn't take that much time, especially if you have strong arms, which I do not. But I think this is a really cool thing. And then you can have your own homemade puff pastry for so many different things. There are a lot of obviously savory applications as well. But what I'm going to show you, a little preview here, I am going to be making a flan pâtissière, which is like a pastry cream inside a puff pastry crust. I'm going to be showing you how to make a millefeuille, which is like puff pastry strips with really delicious cream piped in the center of it. Really, really classic dessert. And there are so many other applications you can be using puff pastry for. So this is something I personally want to experiment more with in my kitchen. And I'm hoping that this gives you the inspiration to experiment more with it in your kitchen, whether you go the extra mile of making the puff pastry or you just get the store-bought version. Both are completely acceptable. All right, I've got a nice rectangle here now. I'm going to cut off the edges just so, again, it's really nice and straight. You probably don't have to do this depending on the application you're using later, but I wanted to, both to see if I could spot some of the layers of butter in here, and then also just to have it look a little bit nicer, more professional. So if you have these scraps of dough, you can just like use these for snacks. Like if you want to have like a sweet version, just bake them off with some like cinnamon sugar. If you want a savory version, like bake them off with some shredded cheese. That will be totally fine. Otherwise, yeah, this is the very first step. This is the puff pastry. Go ahead and use it as you normally would. Get it wrapped up back in your refrigerator, and please stay tuned. I hope you are as excited as I am, both to try out puff pastry in your own kitchen and for my upcoming puff pastry based recipes. They are to die for. Absolutely so good. They are so good. I cannot wait for you to watch them and taste them, make them yourself. If you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that so you don't miss out on those or any other upcoming recipes and tutorials. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.